Today is Good Friday, and today we're reminded that this is the day that Christ suffered and died for us. And he picked up his cross and took on all of our sin and all of our pain and suffering and bore it in love for us. In Luke's gospel, he says, "And he said to all, 'If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Whoever loses his life for my sake will save it.'" In this gospel, we're reminded that Christ gave the total gift of self for us, but we're also called to share in the sufferings of Christ. Mother Teresa knew so well that even though Christ has suffered and died for us, we are all called to suffer with him in the different sufferings that we encounter in our day-to-day lives. And on our mission trips, we experience a lot of suffering as well. So today we have Andy here. And Andy went to Colorado in the summer of 2019 with Christ in the City. And there he embraced some suffering, and we're just happy to have him today. So Andy, can you tell us a bit about your experience there?
Sure, thank you for the invitation
to
just talk about this. So this was almost 2 years ago, but it was such a life-changing experience that I can remember it pretty well. I was invited to go by a Focus missionary, and the trip consisted of 3 Focus missionaries and about 27 other college students, so 30 of us. And we got together and spent a couple days on retreat, preparing ourselves, getting to know each other.
Yeah.
And then we headed off to the Christ in the City headquarters right outside the city of Denver, Colorado. When we arrived, the missionaries were so warming, inviting, welcoming.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it, but just that first encounter with them, they were preparing us and teaching us how to interact with the people that we're going to meet later on the streets. It's like, wow, it's kind of like the Karate Kid. You don't even know you're being trained.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, you just felt so welcomed
Yeah.
and safe. It's like a safe space. And they spent a few days training us. But
They were training you to serve the poor on the streets?
sure, yeah, exactly. Just what to avoid. So the missionaries always go out in groups. Ladies always accompanied. Sometimes they avoid using trigger words like homeless or addict or lazy. You don't want to use those in conversation. You want to keep it simple. Ask them what their name is. And if you don't know what to say, you can fall back on the acronym HOPE, which stands for hobbies, occupations, people, and endearment. I'm sorry, P is the place.
Place, okay.
So you can fall back on the acronym HOPE, which is hobbies, occupations, places, and endearment.
Very nice.
And
yeah,
before we encountered the homeless, we first got to see where they lived. We got to witness their environment. We went on a walk, and we saw some of the sewers that they spent time in. Miles long sewers under the city with graffiti.
Okay.
And it was just almost unhumane. It's like, how on earth?
Were they living in the sewers?
This was a place that they like to hang out.
Okay.
Apparently it's cooler. It's just, they like to get some privacy. There's also graffiti around the city, most of it which was covered up. And the missionaries taught us, hey, by covering up this graffiti, even though it is a legal activity, you're kind of covering up them. This was a part of them, and the reason they kind of vandalized in this way was they just were so desperate to be remembered, to be heard, to be someone, to have a legacy.
It sounds like they were really, like more than anything, just suffering from loneliness or suffering from just having a friend. Was this like a trial that you experienced while you were in Colorado, or what trials did you face and what trials did you experience the friends on the street suffering?
Yeah, I think the greatest thing I suffered was my fear of being a hypocrite. or just like, I'm not worthy, I can't do anything. I can't actually help them.
I see. Why did you feel that way?
Well, that's my mindset of overemphasizing physical needs, forgetting that people have spiritual needs and emotional needs. That, for me, I'm usually fulfilled, and I forget that if they're not fulfilled, how degrading that can be.
Yeah.
But just being able to listen, simple as that, listen. That they're not really seeking advice.
Right.
I mean, we can give it if they ask, but just to share what they're feeling at the moment, what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, their opinions on anything.
Yeah.
And just getting their feelings heard.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of Mother Teresa's quotes when she says, one of the greatest diseases in the world is to be nobody to anyone, and how her whole mission was to love and serve one person, not just their physical or bodily needs, but even more so their spiritual and emotional needs, to make sure they could feel heard, because she knew the greatest poverty and the greatest suffering is in this loneliness. And I think when I always think about Christ on the cross experiencing this loneliness and the suffering, not only physically, but how he felt so abandoned, and how he thirsts for us, and had suffering not just in a bodily way, but in a spiritual way as well, which
yeah,
really
I can tell
seems
that the friends on the street, that's what they call the homeless, they call them friends.
Yeah.
And I just love that, I've taken that away. I'm like, hey, there's a friend. Gotta say hey.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely saw that they had a thirst just to talk with someone,
Yeah.
to be heard. And
Do you think what you learned at Christ in the City from experiencing the great importance of listening to a person, how has that changed your way of thinking about suffering, and how have you been able to embrace suffering more in your day-to-day life since then?
Sure. I was reminded in a huge way that not all suffering is bad, and you cannot perfectly understand a rational suffering.
Yeah.
So it's not bad.
All suffering has purpose.
It has purpose. One of the missionaries, when they were giving a talk and preparing us, were like, yeah, God does not like to see suffering. He weeps at it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he permits and allows it so that we may grow and become more like Christ. It's a mystery. But we become more like Christ the more we suffer, and we unite that suffering to him. Can you repeat a second?
Yeah. So,
part?
in your day-to-day life, how do you experience suffering, and how do you carry it? What are some specific ways that you learned not only to embrace suffering, but to know that it's okay?
Sure. The hope that can come from suffering, or the hope within suffering, that these people who seem like they didn't know what's going to happen next, they don't know where their next meal's coming from,
Right.
their families abandoned them, beyond their physical needs, they just feel dead. They feel tired. But yet they can still smile. They can still receive a gift, even though they've been hurt in the past from other people. Some of these homeless people choose to accept the gift when we approach them of just time. That's what we can give them, time.
Yeah.
And even though other people have rejected them over and over and over again,
Yes.
they can, most of them still accepted that gift and weren't bitter. And it was like, okay, maybe this is a step towards something better.
Yeah.
And they had hope within that suffering.
Yeah. So the biggest thing, I guess, the biggest takeaway is to keep hope within suffering, to know that Christ suffers with us, that all suffering has purpose. And it's okay to bear these crosses, and it's okay to to hope for something better and something greater, and know that like whatever God sends us, whether it's suffering or joy, that it's all in His plan and for His purposes.
Yeah, and it's psychologically helpful to remain optimistic.
Yeah.
But it's also the truth. Like, it's also, I think, theologically right. To be hopeful, to be optimistic, saying, hey, this cross that I'm bearing, or this loneliness I'm experiencing, I don't have to ration it out. I don't need to understand it. The only thing I need to know, and to fall back to, and to remind myself over and over again, is that God sees me. He will give me what I need, and He can bring good out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a mystery. Like when I see these homeless, I'm like, I don't know if they're actually going to get better, if they're actually going to get to a better place. But you always got to have that hope. And when they can have that hope too, oh man, you're both hopeful together.
Yeah.
And it's crazy beautiful. It's more beautiful than anything I've experienced, just seeing their hope.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience with suffering with us. And let's all remember, like, from your example and your experience in suffering, that like we can, in Christ, even as He died and suffered for us, had so much hope, for the resurrection. And let's carry that hope in our day-to-day lives, really embracing the suffering around us and embracing the suffering in our neighbors, knowing that it has purpose and it has hope. And we don't always need to know the reason why. It's okay for there to be mystery. So thank you very much, Andy.
Yeah, thank you.